regent I will call to order our committee chairs meeting for the Tennessee Board of Regents this warm Tuesday, August 27, 2024, and hope everybody is doing well as summer hopefully comes to an end here in the next few weeks. Just as a reminder, this meeting, of course, is our prep meeting, if you will, for our time at our regular quarterly meeting at Dyersburg State coming up very soon. So we will preview a number of items that we'll be discussing at the Dyersburg State meeting. No action for this portion of our meeting today. Of course, that will change when we move to the Audit Committee, where Chairman Burdine has several action items for his committee. We are, of course, as always, being live streamed and recorded, and this will be archived on our TBR website. Now, you guys, there are a couple of familiar faces you may not see this morning. And I know Mariah's been in touch with the board, but we have had some changes to our board structure. We say goodbye to Regent Mary Lou Apple and to Regent Mark Gill, who concluded their service with the terms that ended on June 30. They will come back, though, to our December meeting. They've both been invited, and hopefully their calendars were clear right now. Hopefully we'll still be able to join us in December so we can honor them for their service, and they'll be present with us for our holiday lunch. I know everybody will miss those two. Mary Lou's incredible, 40 plus years of service to the Tennessee Board of Regents, both within our college system and as a regent. And then, of course, Mark Gill, who enjoyed his 6 years of service very much and feels that the system is in such a great place. And he's so proud of the Chancellor's work. He has done us good service as well over the course of his term. But we have new faces to welcome as well. And I want to introduce you to our new faculty regent. So Ross, you will have some company going forward. That new faculty regent is Angela Richardson. She is with our TCAT Harriman. She's a master instructor in administrative office technology. She is also the vice president for academic affairs and coordinates all of their institutional effectiveness matters. Angela has served over 30 years in our system. I had the opportunity to meet her the other day. She came down to the McMinnville, at the Coffee County for our McMinnville TCAT, to the groundbreaking there on what was a beautiful morning and a great program. So she's making her way around the state with us. Angela, welcome. And what did I miss telling your fellow regents about you?
Good morning, everyone. First off, I'm just so excited to be a part of the Board of Regents and what these next 2 years will entail. So far as missing anything, I don't think that you've missed telling them anything. As you said, I've I guess well seasoned is the term I will use. I've been I started out in enrollment management and student services, and then migrated over into the faculty side of things. So with the TCAT, that pretty much encompasses everything that goes on. So, just a good career with the TBR system. And I look forward to hopefully several more years doing so.
Absolutely. We sure hope so. And we're delighted to have you represent faculty, and you will enjoy working with Ross Roberts from Northeast State, your fellow faculty regent. So we will see you in person in West Tennessee in September.
Yes, ma'am.
Thanks, Angela. And then second of all, we welcome Regent Jeremy Harrell, who will take the at-large seat for the 5th Congressional District. Jeremy has a tremendous background in public policy. He's worked in the governor's office. He's worked in campaigns. He is a great advocate. He knows how to lead major policy initiatives. I got to know him a little bit when he worked for Senator Haslam. And in fact, I think he appointed some of us to this board, since boards and confirmation were in his portfolio for Governor Haslam. Jeremy's also done an amazing thing over the course of the last couple of years, and he has founded the Adoption Project, a personal passion for him and his wife, Michelle. He is really moving the needle on good adoption policies, friendlier adoption policies, an advocate for foster care in Tennessee and beyond. He's done a remarkable job in pulling this up out of the ground and once again showing not just his skills at building a team, but how best to advocate for public policy, especially on something that is very near and dear to him. So, Jeremy, welcome. It's going to be fun having a chance to work with you again. And just as I asked Angela, what did I leave out about you that you'd like for your colleagues to know?
Well, thank you, Emily. And the thing that I am proudest of, top of my list, husband of one and father of three. And I I am very grateful to Governor Lee for his trust, and look forward to serving with you all in a way that honors the legacy and history and mission of the Board of Regents.
Thank you. Welcome aboard. We're thrilled you're here, and you'll be with us in Dyersburg. So once again, everyone will have a chance to meet you then. And this all came together pretty fast. So thanks for making time in your calendar to join us this morning. We anticipate a couple of more appointments, which will include our student region, of course, in the weeks to come. So more to come there. But again, welcome to Angela and to Jeremy. And finally, with Mary Lou's departure, Kyle Spurgeon has graciously agreed to take over as chair of academic affairs for us, for which we're very grateful. And so Russ and his team will get Regent Spurgeon up to speed before our September meeting. Thank you, Kyle.
Thank you for asking.
Oh, thank you. And as you guys know, on our committee structure, as folks roll off and others roll on, I'll be working with those folks on committee assignments and preferences. We can't accommodate everyone's preferences, of course. But so more to come on committee assignments with these changing seats. So stand by, but we'll be fully assembled, hopefully, for Dyersburg. So with that, Chancellor, let's see. I will come back to you for any opening comments as we move into the agenda. But I know I need to call on Mariah to make this official now, and let's call the roll.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Since this is an electronic meeting, there are 2 questions that need to be answered by regents for the record. First, can the regent simultaneously hear and speak with others participating in the meeting? And second, is the regent alone in the room? If the answer to both questions is yes, the regent can simply answer yes to both questions. Anyone who is not alone should identify any other people present in the room with the regent. When I call your name, please answer these 2 questions. Governor Lee, Regent Burdine,
Yes to both.
Regent Gentile, Regent George,
Here and yes to both questions.
Regent Harrell,
Here and yes to both.
Commissioner Hatcher, Regent Hooper,
Here and yes to both.
Regent Kastner,
Yes to both questions.
Regent Powers,
Here and yes to both.
Madam Chair Reynolds.
So sorry. I am here and yes to both.
Thank you. Commissioner Reynolds,
Here, yes to both.
Regent Richardson,
Here and yes to both.
Regent Roberts,
Here and yes to both.
Regent Spurgeon,
Here and yes to both.
Regent Stevenson, Regent Varlin,
Here and yes to both.
and Regent White.
Here and yes to both.
Thank you. Just checking, has Regent Gentile joined? He may hop on a little bit later. With that, Madam Chair, your board is assembled.
I thank you very much. We have one more housekeeping item that most of us are familiar with. We are meeting electronically today as it is the most economically efficient way to give us a chance to look at some items that need your timely review prior to our quarterly board meeting in September. This has become, of course, a non-controversial and routine item, and I would propose that the necessity to meet electronically be adopted by unanimous consent. Of course, if anybody feels differently and you want an individual vote on this necessity to meet electronically, please feel free to object. Hearing no objection, the necessity to meet electronically is adopted by unanimous consent. Thank you all. With that, Chancellor, any opening remarks for us this morning?
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. And I would also like to welcome Angela and Jeremy to our group. You are now going to be among some of the best individuals in the state of Tennessee. And I hope that you will find your time to be rewarding on this board. I'd like to give you a little bit of an update as well on our TCAT Jackson presidential search. As you know, we've had that ongoing. The board approved the search criteria on June 13th. And thank you to Regent Spurgeon, who agreed to chair this search, along with serving Ross Roberts, Nisha Powers, and Mark George, and the other committee members selected from the community and the college. This search committee reviewed 46 applicants for this presidential position and narrowed it down to the 7 semifinalists that we interviewed on August the 12th. From that, we selected 3 finalists that will go on to campus interviews on September the 4th. Unfortunately, we did have one of those finalists that was unable to continue the search due to some family health issues that have occurred. So our 2 finalists will be on campus September 4th. All of that will be recorded. If you have an opportunity to watch it live or to go back and watch the recording, please do so and fill out the survey forms and give your opinion on the top 2 candidates. The intention is to bring to the board the recommendation for the next president at the September board meeting. We do plan to have this president in place October 1. So thank you all to have worked so hard to make this happen. And I am so happy to say that after that selection has been made, we will have no open president's positions. Everybody knock on wood. It's been a long time since I've been able to say that. So very excited. I also would like to spend a little bit of my time now by yielding it over to Dr. Deaton. You heard Dr. Deaton talk at our June board meeting about the FAFSA and where we were as a state with dealing with the changes that were brought about. Quite frankly, we're in our due thanks to Lamar Alexander for making the changes to the FAFSA, but the changes themselves brought about some difficulty in implementation. This is FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid, and it is the keystone for all of our federal and Tennessee-based financial aid processes. And while it is still somewhat of a lengthy instrument, it is much better than it was. But as I said, the rollout was fraught with some errors at the national level. And so Russ is going to give you kind of a brief update as to where we stand as a state. Dr. Deaton, if I could turn it over to you.
Sure thing. Thank you, Dr. Tidings, Vice Chair Reynolds, members of the board. Good morning. It's good to see you all today. And I do want to begin on that first slide with where the Chancellor ended with. This is a decade-plus long quest from Senator Alexander and others to simplify the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid. And those of you who dutifully committed to memory what the EFC acronym used to stand for, which was the output of the FAFSA, will have to now learn a new acronym, which I'll get to in a moment, because there have been some changes. That FAFSA change has the primary goal, as the Chancellor said, of simplifying the instrument. It has been for a long time a lengthy document to fill out. Some of you may have done it for your own children or family members. But with the Simplification Act, that instrument was reduced from well over 100 questions, now down to 40. Not quite getting to where Senator Alexander would famously wave around a postcard saying he hopes to get the FAFSA down to a postcard with 1 or 2 questions. But we're getting there. We got closer. But the outcome of that simplification did several things, and these are and this should not be understated, these are in the best interest of students by far because it simplifies the FAFSA, it expands aid to the Pell Grant, and it also introduces a new way of thinking about students' financial need. Again, that old acronym, which we all knew so well, Expected Family Contribution, EFC, is now being replaced by what's called the Student Aid Index, SAI. So you'll hear TBR and TEC and others from now on talk about the SAI, which the mechanics of it don't matter that much other than the fact that it did a couple of things. It did expand who's eligible for a Pell Grant, and it provided a little more granularity to a student's financial need. The old EFC, of course, stopped at 0, can't go lower than 0. The SAI takes a bit of a different philosophical take, which is that you can have up to a negative 1,500 SAI. So a little more granularity about what the need is and whether that student would be Pell eligible or not. All that, of course, was due to be released this last fall in time for the FAFSA that would govern this academic year that we're starting now. But as Dr. Tidings said, there were some numerous technical challenges that it delayed the FAFSA well into the spring and summer, causing quite a bit of havoc in higher education. Before we get into some of that, though, let's go to the next slide and talk about some of the overall FAFSA numbers. And let's start left to right here. You'll see on the left a map of one of the key FAFSA indicators that everyone tracks, which is how many high school seniors complete a FAFSA from graduating class. Tennessee's got about 75,000 high school seniors, and you see that in this current year, about 61% of them have completed a FAFSA. That's a very good number. That's a healthy number. That is, proud to say, the #1 rate in the U.S. Now, Tennessee's been #1 for a long time. The foundations for this were laid actually back 20 years ago in the lottery scholarship, when the public policymakers at that time had a vision to not just introduce the lottery scholarship, but to put an infrastructure around it, which a key element of is an outreach team housed at TSAC and THEC, whose sole job is to fan out across middle and high schools, encouraging students to fill out the FAFSA, showing them how to fill out the FAFSA, conducting workshops. So Tennessee's long been a leader in this metric. One thing about this number, though, is that it's often, of course, a key barometer for college going. You can, but it's difficult to go to college if you've not done your FAFSA, and you definitely would get locked out of federal and state aid if you did not complete the FAFSA. But to put this 61% in context, this is actually lower than the college going rate was during Tennessee Promise. In other words, back when Promise launched in 2015, the college going rate itself was 65%. We're now having a FAFSA filing rate lower than even the college going rate. So indicating, again, some continued pressure from economic disruptions and COVID on the college going rate. Now, flip to the right-hand side of this same chart, and you'll see how the FAFSA completions of the last 2 years have moved over time. So what you're seeing as you move left to right on that slide is week by week, what percentage of those high school seniors have filled out a FAFSA. In blue, you see the last year's class of 23, before these changes occurred. And you see you really get a huge surge in the numbers starting in October when the FAFSA used to open, all the way up to about March 1 when Promise closed, the FAFSA closed, and you basically end up with about 71% of high school seniors in the last class having completed a FAFSA. Again, that stands in stark contrast to where we are now, about 10 percentage points lower with the class of 2024. You also see a big delay in when those FAFSAs began to be completed. Again, an outgrowth of the technical delays at the federal level. But to kind of get a little more deep here, kind of train your eye on kind of the middle of that chart, around May 1 or so, and kind of move upward. Your eye will hit that red line at around 45%. So about May 1, roughly 45% of seniors had done a FAFSA this year. If you keep moving your eye up to hit the blue line, you'll hit about 65% or so. That's the gap. That's the issue that really, I think, sprung everyone into action this past spring when we were way behind, the nation was, on seniors filling out the FAFSA. That's when you saw Tennessee's entire higher education apparatus spring into action to try to improve those numbers. The colleges themselves worked tirelessly on this. The Shared Services Center here at TBR, partner organizations throughout the state, TSAC and THEC, also by pushing promise deadlines back and assistance they provided. Basically, everyone was mobilized to get that number up. And as you can see, shorter window from about March or April up to here midsummer, we've more or less made up quite a bit of that ground on the FAFSA completions. Not all of it, but quite a bit. Now, going to the last slide, what does all this mean for higher education enrollment this fall? The short version right now is that preliminary enrollment is up, but this story has yet to be finalized. When we meet again in September, we will have a much more solid understanding of where enrollments are this fall. Classes at most colleges just started yesterday, and TCATs start next week. But preliminarily, what we're seeing so far is overall about a 6% increase in that preliminary headcount compared to this time last fall. And folks, obviously that is a huge victory because for a long time throughout COVID, there's been negative downward pressure on enrollment, but so far they're looking up. We have been tracking all summer our applications. They're trending about the same, up about 5%. As we break down that enrollment, dual enrollment among the K-12 students continues to be a strong growth area for TBR. That is right now up about 16%. And the metric that I probably follow more than any of these thus far is new freshmen. So far, that new freshman number, which has been under pressure again since fall 20, is starting to grow up about 3%. We hope that number holds and so that when we report to you in September, we're still seeing growth in that new freshman class. TCATs, all of them start next week, and so don't have data on enrollment yet. They've yet to go to class and register attendance, but they have registered for those classes. And thus far, TCAT registration is also up about 13% compared to the same time last fall. So the short answer, I think, so far is that because I think of the very hard work and aggressive work that Tennessee across the state did, we were able to mostly mitigate the negative impacts of the FAFSA. There's probably still going to be some residual impact that's hard to detect. It's almost hard to sort of prove the counterfactual. But I think because of the hard work across the state's apparatus in higher education, those effects were largely mitigated. And hopefully we're going to see, because we have so far, a growth story in higher education at TBR. When we meet again in September, you're going to see a more full explanation of enrollments with a fuller breakdown of what we're seeing this fall. Also looking at recent graduations and graduation rates, some interesting insights into dual enrollment and the labor market outcomes as well. So with that, Dr. Tidings, be happy to turn it back to you for other comments or to answer questions from the board.
Russ, thank you very much for that. Are there any questions regarding this? Again, I think the message across the state is that we were all nervous, we all got very concerned, and the state came together with THEC and worked hard to make sure that our students were able to complete at a much higher level, as you saw, than the rest of the country.
That is good news.
Well done.
Yes.
Very good
No.
news.
Well said, Miles. That is very good news. And with that, Chancellor, while we wait to see if there are any questions, Dr. Gentile has just joined, so we can thank him for all the hard work from THEC. Mariah, do you want to ask him the 2 questions for the roll, please?
Yes, ma'am. Dr. Gentile, may you confirm if you can hear and speak with us, as well as are you alone in the room?
Yes, I can hear and speak with you, and I am alone.
Thank you.
And thank you for the wonderful partnership on this endeavor. I was just looking at the numbers yesterday. The percentage of Tennessee Promise applicants who's completed a FAFSA is right at where it was last year, which is amazing given everything. So we've had a really good year this year.
Well, and again, we cannot say thank you to you and THEC and what you helped us accomplish. So thank you so much, Stephen.
Thank you.
Chancellor, does that complete your report?
Yes, ma'am, it does. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. And thanks to Regent Spurgeon and everybody touching this Jackson State search. It's a big one. So keep going. Good work. Let's move now into the body of our agenda. And we'll begin with a couple of updates from academic policies and programs. And Dr. Lemming, I think you're going to talk to us about Skills USA this morning.
Good morning, everyone. Before I share highlights from this year's national conference, I want to mention that preparation for our national competition begins a full year in advance through a series of student leadership opportunities that we coordinate each year. So I've just got some highlights here I'd like to share because we had a very good year. This past year, we brought on Daphne Brown to be our State Skills USA Director, and she is TBR's Director of CTE Student Engagement. She has a lot of experience that she brings to that role. She worked as a faculty and staff member at one of our TCATs and was previously a Perkins coordinator in our office. So she had a lot of experience that made it much easier for her to hit the ground running last September. And her first task was to take college chapter members to the Washington Leadership Training Institute in DC. And college attendees earned 3 certifications and the National Statesman Award there. And then she hosted regional chapter jumpstart trainings in each of the grand divisions where students focus on communication, teamwork, and the Skills USA framework. So that got us going. And then in October, Daphne and members of the Student Success team hosted the Tennessee Leadership Training Institute, which is a collaborative event with our Student Government Association and Skills USA. And they go through training on teamwork, advocacy, communication, job skills. That took place over 2 days at TCAT Smyrna with over 100 attendees. And at that event, the state officers are elected and they have an opportunity to earn their Statesman Award and promote kind of cross-college collaboration. Between October and April, we have state officers conduct several trainings. They prepare for the state conference that happens in April. And this past year, in February, we also hosted 5 high school regional conferences. And in March, they held their first ever middle school conference at TCAT Smyrna in conjunction with our high school partners and Nissan. So that's a new venture for us to kind of expand our Skills USA network down to the middle school level. The year-long leadership trainings kind of culminate in our state and national conference each year. And this year, we welcomed 1,700 high school students, 900 college post-secondary students to the competition in Chattanooga. They earn medals in industry-specific competitions with over 70 industry partners participating, and we had over 450 volunteers. 9 of our colleges were recognized with the Chapter of Excellence Award for their dedication to providing students with leadership and community service while incorporating that Skills USA framework. And we also recognized our Skills USA Outstanding Advisor of the Year, TCAT Knoxville's Nellie Blanton. So in May, we finally get to the point where we're doing our National Signing Day, where colleges invite business and industry partners to participate in signing of high school students planning to attend our colleges in the next academic year. And that leads us up to talking about the national conference. Next slide. So we had a really good year at National Conference this year. You can see there we have a national officer, Scott Mull, which is a very unique honor for us. We had over 16,000 people in Atlanta for the national competition. We had 132 students representing 26 of our Tennessee colleges competing in 83 of the 115 different competitions. We brought home 57 medals, 29 gold, 21 silver, and 7 bronze. And with those 57 medals, Tennessee ranked 2nd this year in the overall number of medals, and we lost out to Georgia by just 1 medal. So next year we have that as our goal to try to beat Georgia. Tennessee post-secondary students placed in the top 4 in 41 of the 83 contests that they competed in from students across the nation, which means that we placed in the top 4 in nearly half of the competitions, which again showcases our exceptional quality of career and technical education that we're providing in our Tennessee colleges. And we're all very proud of our state officer, TCAT Knoxville, Scott Mull, who's featured there on the picture, because he actually was selected to be a national officer. Next slide. So Tennessee also earned the award for the largest membership increase in the Skills USA post-secondary division. We moved from a little more than 10,000 students and faculty members last year to over 14,000 this year. We have the largest membership ever and the largest state delegation in the United States. In addition to the individual awards, our Skills USA chapters at 2 TBR colleges, TCAT Chattanooga and Pulaski, were recognized for their selection in April as Models of Excellence for 2024, and that's the highest honor that's bestowed on chapters. They were among only 24 chapters from across the nation selected, and the only college level institution selected in the technical skills category. Next slide. All right, this is the fun part. So one of the competitions held each year is the design of a state pin for the post-secondary chapter. So I have to highlight our pin for this year. It was created by Lolly Brown of TCAT Henry Carroll. And it's not only because Lolly was a state officer and she created this pin, but this pin went viral in social media. It was one of the hottest pins to collect and trade at the national competition this year. And the going rate for swap was like 2 state pins for one of our Tennessee pins, which meant that our Tennessee students were not only very popular, but it encouraged the students from across the country to approach them and talk with them in the hope that they could strike a deal on trading these pins. So we're very proud of the fact that we had such a popular pin this year. Next slide. So after national skills, a select few students get selected to go compete on a global level in our world skills competition. 2 students, Edie and Summers, both attended Roane State Community College, and they were the state and national gold medalists team in the skills championship in 2023. They're employed now as technicians by Denso Manufacturing in Maryville, Tennessee. And at Denso, Edie is responsible for creating and installing electrical systems, and Summers is responsible for programming and teaching robots and doing like vision integration. So their expert, Josh Whittington, is in Valdosta, Georgia. He's the executive director of Wiregrass Technical College. He has an extensive background that's going to be an asset to the team as they train. And he's a professor of mechatronics and workforce development. So he's also served as that technical expert since 2018. And he's been a competitor himself at the world competition in Abu Dhabi in 2017. So we're looking forward to actually having 2 Tennessee world skills competitors perform. That'll happen in France, just like the Olympics, September 10th through the 15th. So that's another great honor for us. Next slide. So in the national skills structure, state associations are also recognized for achieving state standards of excellence in our annual state director and staff convening that was held in early August in Texas. And that program ensures that state associations have policies, procedures, structures in place to provide like a high level of service to our members, and then they benchmark their performance against other organizations in the country. So they submit documentation, it's reviewed by the national office. Again, 3 levels of achievement, just like the Olympics. And this year, our Tennessee chapter earned gold for the 23-24 academic year. So as you can see, we had a great year with our post-secondary skills chapter. I personally want to thank our Office of Student Success team for all the work they did to make all of our events happen, because obviously they're really big events, a lot of people to coordinate. But also Daphne Brown, who serves as our state director for post-secondary. She did amazing things in her first year. So I know that we're going to reach even greater heights in the coming year. And that's my presentation. Just want to share all that good news with the group today.
That is great news. And I think Chancellor has a word for us.
I do. Again, I want to thank Heidi and Daphne for the incredible work that they did this year to get our teams to the level that they performed at. But also, again, we have to give kudos to the faculty and the instructors where this all begins and where they get the students prepared. If anybody ever questions the quality of the work that is done in our technical colleges, this blasts that myth out of the water. We are one of the highest states in the country, again, for the quality of the work that is done at our colleges. This represents that. They are competing with people from all over the nation, and we come out winning that many gold medals. So again, thank you to the team, but thank you to our instructors that do this every single day to the best of their ability. I cannot say enough about them.
That's very exciting. And I was watching Danny Varlin's face. I think she wants a pink Cadillac pin.
I do. Let me ask a question. Oh, am I on? Yeah, my mic's on.
Mm-hmm.
Heidi, is Skills USA different from Technology Student Association, TSA, or did they merge? What do you know?
I'm not as familiar with that other association. Maybe someone else is. I don't have a history there with that group. I don't know.
That was really a hot, big high school thing. Mm-hmm. And, you know, my kids were really involved in the same type of things. In high school, they did speaking. But I'm wondering, I don't know, I'll have to look it up, if it's, because you're talking about high school and middle school, if that is now all one big organization. Because when I first got involved and learned about this, I was particularly interested because my kids had been involved in high school, 2 of them, and it was just such a great learning experience and all the same setup. So I'll just have to look. But thank you.
Yeah, we've been partners with the Tennessee Department of Education on the secondary side for many years through Skills USA. So from my history being here, we've always been Skills USA with secondary. So at least the last 10 years, we've been partners with them on that, but maybe there was something before that. And
they've been out of high school for a while. They're in their 30s, so I'll have to look.
It might be just an old name. Maybe it's the same thing, just a rebrand. Yeah.
But it's this organization, it is fantastic for those who have not had a chance to ever attend or be a judge or something. I'm telling you, it's just incredible to see how talented these students are. It will blow your mind. I mean, you know, in welding, and then, for example, and then they will have a lot of those people have tremendous artistic talent, and you get to see how that turns out. And, you know, they've actually added more and more competitions, I think, haven't they? Don't they have culinary and stuff like that now? Yeah, I need to get to that next one. Okay, thanks.
Oh, excellent. Heidi, thank you. And when we assemble in Dyersburg, will you be able to have a quick update for us from France?
I sure will. If I get the results by then, yeah.
Excellent. All right. That's great.
And Angela,
thank you.
I think you had your hand up. Did you?
Oh, so sorry, Chancellor. Thank you.
Oh, I was just going to add, for those of us that have been around for a little while, Skills USA was born out of VICA. So some of us may remember the old VICA back in the maybe 80s and 70s. And Danny, I can definitely hook you up with one of those pink Cadillac pens.
Oh my gosh, I'll pay you. I just think that is so cute. I have a bunch of pens that I've collected over time, but that's a winner.
I will bring you one in Dyersburg.
Reminds me of the Aretha Franklin song, Pink Cadillac.
Exactly. And Matthew has also posted that Skills has broader competitions, much broader competitions than TSA. It fits more with the TCATs and community college offerings. So there's a little additional background.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, excellent. Thank you. Another good report. Thanks, Heidi. Dr. Den, you are coming to us with a proposed policy revision. This is the first of several policy revisions we'll hear today that should be on consent agendas when we meet next month. Is Dr. Den with us?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Good morning, Vice Chair Reynolds, committee chairs, and Chancellor Tidings. The policy on general education requirements and degree requirements has passed the Joint Academic Affairs, Student Affairs Subcouncil, the Faculty Subcouncil, and the President's Council with the following 8 revisions showing on your monitor there. We've referenced the new 2025 TBR Core Framework document. Removed sections that pertain to university governance and degrees, the pre-focus period. We've removed clauses that are more appropriate for other policies such as TTP, curricular pathways, GPA calculation, and prereq, co-req factors towards credentials. Of course, we removed inactive links. And we've specified special degree distribution requirements, most notably the Associate for Fine Arts, which has been operating under a special exception, but we wanted that to be in the policy. We've deleted deficiency thresholds that we no longer monitor, like the High School American History requirement for baccalaureate degrees. And we've included the new core course approval process established by the steering committee which basically outlines the processes by which a college can add a course to their general education core. And then the usual general language cleanup and organization. We're recommending approval of the revised policy as reflected in the clean copy in your materials, and that is my very brief presentation, Madam Chair.
Any questions for Dr. Den? All right, Stephen?
I have a question real quick. Thank you very much, Chairwoman. Dr. Den, looking at number 2, revisions, removing sections pertaining to university governance and degrees. Is that more of a cleanup coming out of focus, or is that touch on the financial oversight at all that TBR has?
There's nothing to do with financials, sir. It's only the degree requirements for like graduate degrees and those kinds of things that are unrelated to what we offer.
Good question. Here's Regent Powers. Good morning. Nisha, you need to unmute. There we go.
Sorry. On, I think it was number 6, you had mentioned, was it an American history course that was being removed? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, in legislation it's required that students who are pursuing a baccalaureate degree must have high school American history that's equal to 1 credit. As part of when we were part of the larger Tennessee Board of Regents with the now LGIs, we used to monitor that to make sure that those students had that high school history. Since they come to us, we removed that since we no longer govern baccalaureate degrees. And also it became unnecessary because the almost every state, including Tennessee, requires high school students to have American history. So it was really not necessary to keep this clause in there. Did that answer your question?
Absolutely did. Thank you so much, Dr. Den.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, sir. As you guys know, all of this is in our materials posted on the website. If you need to dig deeper, I'm sure Dr. Den would be happy to take any further questions prior to our next meeting. But thank you for that quick briefing.
You're welcome.
Thank you, sir. Let's move to a couple of personnel and compensation items. And Dr. Reed and Dr. Fox, I'll let you guys tag team on this next one since I think one plays off of the other.
Great. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board, and Chancellor Tidings. Excuse me, I'm bringing a promotion by exception to you all from Pellissippi State Community College. Next slide, please. The board will be asked to approve this recommendation for promotion by exception. President Dr. Wise recommended Allison McKittick, a library faculty member, for promotion from associate professor, and also to get a retroactive salary increase to July 1, 2024. She was recommended by her peers for promotion to associate professor. This recommendation was supported at the college level by both the Vice President for Academic Affairs as well as the President's Office. Mrs. McCurdy was inadvertently omitted from the final list submitted to TBR by the college, so we're bringing it back to you now for a promotion by exemption. Thank you, Madam Chair. That's my update.
Thank you. Dr. Fox, why don't you slide in here and then we'll see if we have any questions around this.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thank you, Vice Chair, Chancellor, and members of the board. So following up on what Dr. Reed just noted, this correction has a minimal financial impact that I'm going to present to you today, as well as one other correction that was not included in June. So the details for these promotion corrections were included in your materials sent in advance of today's meeting. But briefly, Pellissippi mistakenly omitted one faculty member from their promotion list in June and the list of corresponding increases. This additional promotion results in an annual increase of $3,030 for Miss Allison McKittrick. Additionally, Pellissippi mistakenly submitted an incorrect salary increase amount for one additional eligible faculty member that was approved in June, and this would result in an annual increase of an additional $800. And Madam Vice Chair, that is my report, and I'll be happy to answer questions if there are any.
Anything for Dr. Fox or Dr. Reed on this? These come up from time to time, and I know they're important to the colleges and the individuals involved. So thanks for bringing them to us. Hearing no questions, Brian Lapps, you have a proposed policy revision for the Personnel Committee as well today.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board, Chancellor Tidings. Last year, following passage of the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act and the PUMP Act, both relating to pregnancy, childbirth, and related medical conditions, the board passed this policy. Now, some regulations have been implemented, and so we're making some minor tweaks to the policy, or we're suggesting minor tweaks to the policy, so we can comply with the regulations that the federal government has implemented. So first of all, this policy clarifies that it applies to employees. The revisions are pursuant to the PWFA regulations, not the enjoined Title IX regulations that you may have read about and that continue to receive the discussion when the Supreme Court recently issued a decision. We may end up having to and wanting to revise a policy or create a policy regarding pregnancy for students, but this one affects employees only. And in accordance with the regulations, it does a few things. Number one, it requires that when an employee informs a supervisor she is pregnant, that supervisor needs to tell the employee how to request a reasonable accommodation. And that's either going to the Title IX coordinator or other person who is identified by the institution as being the person who should be the point person for receiving and making the reasonable accommodation that is the hallmark of the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. It also limits documentation to that which is necessary. Sometimes people have the attitude of let's get all the documentation and then we'll just figure out what we need. This approach is to take the minimum necessary reasonable documentation. For example, more documentation if a pregnant employee claims that I need to be at bed rest is probably appropriate than someone who is obviously pregnant saying I'm going to be having a baby scheduled in due date 4 weeks. I need to have some maternity leave. So we've got that. It also clarifies that unpaid leave can be a reasonable accommodation. It has been approved by the Human Resources officers, as well as the Business Affairs Subcouncil. And with that, Madam Chair, I'll open it up to questions. It looks like Region Harrell has one.
Indeed. Jeremy?
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Just so is employees inclusive of faculty and staff, or is there a distinction in the Board of Regents?
Yes, sir. It includes, and when we use employees, we generally mean faculty and staff. Sometimes it can even mean, for certain purposes, a student employee. How we would deal with this one, a student employee, we'd try to just give that a person the maximum flexibility.
Regent Barlin? Oh, Jeremy, did that get to the heart of your question?
I'm good. I'm trying to figure out how to turn my hand off on my phone.
Okay. It's not on our screen now. Oh, Regent Barlin?
Hey, Brian, how long does, what's the typical leave for someone having a baby?
Well, we've got paid leave for 6
That's what
weeks.
I mean. 6 weeks. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, family medical leave, the federal statute allows up to 12 weeks of paid/unpaid leave. And then under Tennessee law, there's 4 months, so 16-ish weeks. How long is the typical leave? I'm not positive on that one, but if somebody needs more than the 16 weeks or needs a leave prior to childbirth, we would probably be looking at potentially paid leave if they have paid leave or unpaid leave if they don't, as a reasonable accommodation under the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. So it's really individualized. It could be anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks on up.
Let me just clarify what I think I heard. It's 6 weeks of paid leave is the most paid leave?
unless somebody had, last year, the legislature passed a statute providing 6 weeks of paid leave for new parents. If somebody has additional sick leave or annual leave, they can take time. So somebody could take, if they have 4 months of leave, they could have that entire period paid.
Okay, that makes sense. And what about father's leave? Paid?
Fathers are treated equally.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? All right, thank you, Brian. And we'll look for this on the consent agenda as well next month. You guys, let's change gears a little and shift to workforce development. We have 2 reports coming up, and Vice Chancellor McCormick, are you and Jeff going to kick us off on these?
Yes, ma'am. Well, good morning. Right. Good morning, Chair Reynolds, Chancellor Tidings, members of the board. This morning, we will be having a preview of what will be presented to the Workforce Development Committee and Regent George at our next meeting. But right now, I would like to turn to Dr. Jeff Sisk to talk about the Workforce Development Report. And then after him, both Jeff and Zachary Adams will present the findings of the Workforce Committee convening that we held back in the spring. So Dr. Sisk.
Thank you, Vice Chancellor McCormick. Good morning, Vice Chair Reynolds, Committee Chair George, Regents, and Chancellor Tidings. It's my pleasure to bring you this Workforce Development Committee report. This is an informational item, no actions needed. We've got 2 agenda items on here. The THEC reporting cycle and the Community College Workforce Hours preliminary report. And I'll explain that in just a second. And then we're going to talk about the workforce convening outcomes from the statewide workforce convening that we had back in April. And Assistant Vice Chancellor Zachary Adams is going to help tag team that. Just as a reminder, this committee meets 2 times per year at the June and the September board meetings. Then we'll have a Q&A if we need to do that. Next slide, please. So THEC issued their request for our workforce hours report for the 22-23 fiscal year on August 9th. The reporting period for this report is July 1st of 23 through June 30th of 24. You see the timeline there. We are in that second bullet comment right now where I have received the data. Tracy Cordham and I have received the data from the community colleges. We're vetting that data, reviewing. My reports are due to THEC on Friday. In fact, just as a reminder, as a result of the Complete College Tennessee Act in 2010, workforce hours is part of the outcomes-based funding formula. So there's some real money tied to this as well. This year's report's a little different. THEC requested some narrative explanations for certain line items that if it kicked over 1,000 contact hours in any activity, they wanted a narrative explanation as to why. They asked the colleges to write a little narrative brief at the beginning of the report itself, just kind of give some context around the data that's being submitted. And Regent Gentile, I'll defer to you there if you've got any comments on that at this point about, there's a difference between data and information. Sometimes we're data rich, but information poor. This gives you some information to look at THEC. Next slide, please. All right, here's our preliminary numbers. Just draw your attention down to the community college totals line. You see a one-year change of 8.1%. We're looking at from the community colleges 1.174, just a little over 1,170,000 contact hours. Again, this is preliminary data, so we're up about 8% as compared to last year. The TCATs were up from 151 to a little over 223, and we're looking at a preliminary total from TBR of almost 1.4 million hours, which is about a 13% increase. So this is a preliminary data. We're still going to do some vetting. The goal coming into this year, as I told Dr. McCormick, was about 4%. I suspect as I go through the vetting process, and then we submit to THEC, and as they go through their vetting process, we may lose a couple of percent there. And when I say vetting, the 4 guiding questions that we're looking at for everything that's submitted as a part of the outcomes-based funding formula, the 4 guiding questions: is it a course or activity that provides an individual with an occupational, technical, or soft skills for the workplace? Does the course or activity carry no institutional credit that can be applied towards an academic award? Because I don't want the colleges double dipping in the OBF. Is the goal of the course or activity to increase individual opportunity in the labor market, or does the course or activity improve human knowledge, skills, and ability related to the workforce? So that's the 4 litmus questions when I say that we're vetting this data. So Regent Kastner, you had a question?
Yeah, I apologize. I'm just confused by the semantics a little bit. The
Yes,
term contact hours, what does the word contact mean?
So on the workforce side, what we're doing is non-credit. So there's no academic credit awarded. So you're not going to see 3 semester credit hours or something like that. So when we track workforce activities in the community college, i.e. non-credit, it's based on a contact hour. So for example, if Nashville State had 10 people sitting in a 10-hour contact course for a skills upgrade, you're generating 100 contact hours via that activity.
Okay, so it's also raw hours. It's not like a 3-hour class that's 3 hours times 16 weeks is 40, So
Correct.
Gotcha.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Regent George.
Thank you, Jeff. I'm a firm believer in what gets measured gets managed. So this is a great report, and a 13% change for TBR total is great. Can you add some color to 175% 3-year change for the TCATs?
Yeah, as a recurring interim president at a TCAT, but also a TCAT president with 18 years on the job. Contact hours at a TCAT. TCATs are not a part of the outcomes-based funding formula. We're funded different on the TCAT sector, per program, FTE, things like that. But it's a growth, I think, in apprenticeships within the TCATs specifically. For example, at TCAT Jackson, we started a electrician apprentice program about 6 years ago when I was there. It was a 4-credit program that was kind of difficult to manage in that context. We flipped it using some grant money and some seed money from Zachary Adams' office, the Center for Apprenticeship, to make it a non-credit workforce apprenticeship program itself. And so we were able to jump significantly just from TCAT Jackson using that strategy. Also, that number that you see in the TCAT contact hours is a result of BOSK coming online and us delivering workforce training for new BOSK employees out at Blue Oval City. The news is out there. Ford's not hiring yet, but BOSK continues to hire. And we got a lot of contact hours on the workforce side working with BOSK. So in the TCAT sector, the 2 biggest growth areas, and Dr. Deaton kind of mentioned this at TBR as a whole, is dual enrollment and apprenticeship. So I think it's in recognition of more apprenticeships coming online.
Jeff, I believe Chancellor has a comment, and
Yeah.
Regent Barlin.
Yeah.
And Danny, do you want to go ahead and ask your question, and then I'll.
That'd be fun. Thank you so much. Have we seen this report before? Not this specific one, but I don't know if I've ever seen a report like this.
Out every year, but Jeff's just doing such a better job in putting it in layman's terms. But we report these numbers into THEC every year, and then it's usually wrapped up into our report. So Jeff's just doing a great job in bringing this to the forefront.
This is so interesting. Now, I looked, but it may be somewhere else. Is this actually in the report that's online? Is this slide in there, Jeff? Do you know? I don't see it under workforce development, but if it's not, can we have this report?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
This is very interesting.
So we report, Regent Barlin, we report this every fall at the September board meeting generally. In June, we kind of talk about it. In September, we have some fairly solid numbers The way the THEC reporting timeline this year is, they're not going to be final numbers. That'll be in October before we do it. But this is the first time anyone other than Regent George and Dr. McCormick have seen the 23-24 hours.
Yeah, it's
So
just the way
this
it's laid
is new.
out and stuff is really good. So thank you.
Sure.
Chancellor, you've also got Regent George with a comment or question as well.
Regent George, you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Sure, I'll be glad to. I just really like that 48% 1 year change for the TCATs. I just think that is so outstanding for workforce development. But you touched on Blue Oval. I just was, as a side note, I just wanted to know, there's been a lot in the press lately about cutting back on the on EVs specific to Ford, and I think I've seen something mentioned about Stanton. So you got any update on that?
Good question.
So I'll defer to the chancellor, because I had to sign a non-disclosure agreement, or agree to the one that she signed, and this is a public meeting. So I'll defer to the chancellor there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure everybody's seen the articles that have been in the paper. What the message is from Ford is that they're still committed to Stanton. They will be opening there. They delayed the opening because I think they're doing a little bit of redesigning as to what will actually be produced at that plant now. And so the thing for us is to stick with them and to make sure that we're ready for the employees that they are going to need. As you all know, the EV market slowed. It did not get the push or the excitement that I think many of the manufacturers thought it was going to bring to the table. And so you've got all of the manufacturers in that space now sort of recalculating, re-examining what they plan to put forward. And so we've had good conversations with Ford. The one thing, as I said before, that they really want us to make sure we in the state understand is that they are still committed to making that plant a viable Ford plant. It's going to look a little different than what we thought in the very beginning. The one other thing I wanted to say about this workforce hours, and for years, when I do my report to legislators, one of the things I talk about is the workforce hours we do in addition to all the credit work that we do. I talk about the 180,000 students that we serve a year. But what excites me about this is every time I look at this, what I know is happening is that this means a company has either relocated or expanded in the state of Tennessee, because we've had to train workers to meet what they are doing in their space. And so if you'll think of it that way, when you see those hours, know that that is healthy economic news for the state of Tennessee. It's not just a report. This translates into people that have gone to work in a company in this state and are now trained at the highest level possible. So it's huge what TBR, what our colleges do for the workforce. And sometimes that's not always portrayed in quite the way that I want it to be at the top of the list. So it's exciting times.
And if I may, Regent George, let me add one thing to the chancellor's comments. I mentioned BOSK, that is the battery provider that is co-located with Ford at the Memphis mega site. They are still hiring. They're still going to get into production. They're going to be producing batteries. They're going to be shipped to the Ford plant in Ohio for the electric transit vans that they're building. So BOSK, the battery side of that operation, is still onboarding and still hiring. Yes, sir.
Just one more comment about that, and I'm sure TBR is thinking about this, but significant CapEx has been spent there at that in Stanton on EV type infrastructure. So they'd be curious to know how that's going to impact the CapEx spending there.
Are you talking about at our facility particularly, or at the plant?
Yeah, at the TCAT Stanton facility. You know, when we toured that, it's all geared towards EV technology, and if Ford kind of changes how they use that plant, we've made a big investment there with EV resources.
Well, the great news is that plant, while we've got EV training that can occur, that is occurring in there, because as Jeff just said, we're still doing the BOSC training, and that plant can be anything it needs to be. That's how it was built and designed. So whatever we need to be doing in that plant, we can do for whatever industry comes into the area. We already knew that there was going to be a delay in the plant opening, so we went ahead and started putting programs into the facility that are in immediate need within the community that we needed to expand in. And so in the fall, you're going to see a complement of offerings that will be helpful to existing business and industry. And, I'm going out a little bit of a limb, but I still believe that EV is going to be a part of what Ford does there. My guess is we're looking at hybrid. And again, that's my guess. I've not been told that. But so the EV will still be a part of that. The engine will be a part of that. But we can turn that facility into anything that we need it to do. And that's, again, to the design and the work of our facilities group, Dick Tracy and Jeff Holmes. They knew from the beginning that any plant we build, any building that we build now, we have to be able to transition into whatever the industry needs us to do. And that is our logic behind every single building that we put up. But that building will have people in it. We will be training, and we will be using it to the benefit of that community now, and even more so September 1.
Pending any other questions on that slide. Next slide, please, Carol.
Jeff, and as you transfer, just in the chat, so you know, while Dr. Gentile had to drop out, he too wanted to add his thanks to you for a very good report on workforce contact hours. So
thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Let's talk for a few moments about the statewide workforce convening outcomes. I'm going to co-present with Zachary Adams, and I think everyone knows Zachary, Assistant Vice Chancellor in the Academic Affairs Office, also does a lot of work across our system in apprenticeships, and just an incredibly valuable resource, and we're lucky to have him. So Zachary, let me kick it off to you to hit this first slide or two. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Jeff. As you'll recall, the Chancellor hosted a workforce convening along with the commissioners from the Tennessee Department of Labor and the Tennessee Department of Economic and Community Development. And the purpose of that workforce convening was to bring together our college presidents and vice presidents alongside CEOs and business leaders from across the state to hear directly from them on how their industry is changing, what they are forecasting as the immediate and long-term needs for their companies. And it was a fantastic discussion with over 100 employers, supported by all of the system office staff and 50 of our college presidents and vice presidents. The governor was also able to attend and speak to the room about his vision for workforce development, and commend the chancellor and her vision for how the system has supported workforce development across the state. Next slide, please. The goal of this convening was to get actionable feedback from those 100+ CEOs across the state that represented the largest industries in Tennessee. And those pieces of actionable feedback will drive new collaborative efforts between TBR, Economic and Community Development, and the Department of Labor to remove silos and build an education and workforce system that meets the needs of employers and engages more Tennesseans so that they can earn a family-sustaining wage. Next slide, please. Jeff and I are going to present this morning the overarching findings from those employers. At the September board meeting, we will have a detailed report for the board that goes into every single industry that was present. The findings today are the overarching overarching findings rather from all 5 industries that were present at that meeting. Next slide, please. The first finding from the convening last spring was that business leaders are concerned about the labor participation rate and the number of available jobs across all industries. As many of you are aware, labor participation is a stubborn percentage to increase across the state, across the nation, and is agnostic in industry. But demand in every industry continues to grow. And while this is a concern of business leaders, they are comforted by the fact and are eager to partner and continue to partner with TBR colleges to provide new and modify existing training opportunities that innovate around place, space, and time, so where training is occurring, so that we can continue to move the needle on labor participation rate and reskill and upskill existing employees to meet the demand of open jobs across all industries in Tennessee. Next slide, please. I briefly mentioned that employers value their partnership with our colleges, and this rang true across all industries. Employers were able to articulate in very granular detail what each college partnership meant to them and specific partnerships they've been able to form and how that excites them for the future, even with industries changing rapidly and the number of jobs that are open across the state. They are appreciative of how colleges are responsive to meeting their needs, and they are curious about exploring ways in which TBR colleges can support how occupations are specializing, particularly in new forms of training like apprenticeship. And so the system office will continue to support workforce training like apprenticeship and ensure that each college has the resources they need to explore new training modalities to meet workforce demand across the state. Jeff, I'll turn it back to you for the remaining several findings.
Thank you, Zachary. Next slide, please. The third of the findings, finding number 3, is employers are very interested in stackable credentials. They're interested in how short-term workforce training, like we highlighted in that chart earlier, can help their current workforce specialize. 2 weeks ago at TCAT Jackson, I was management by walking around, right? I had my coffee cup and just kind of walking around, see what was going on in campus. And there was an IV certification program for nurses who are interested in being certified to give, chemotherapy IVs and things like that. And the individual cost for that LPN, this is a workforce course that we were doing, was $385 per person to have this certification. And so, that's a barrier for a lot of folks and for companies as well, particularly small companies. But that's just an example of a stackable credential for an incumbent workforce at an organization. You get them in, whatever their base level of knowledge is to get them in the door, but they have to continue to train and innovate and learn new skills, excuse me, while they're on the job itself. Funding issues become who's going to fund it is the primary question, whether someone pays out of pocket or is the company going to fund it. And so that's what we negotiate when new companies are locating or existing companies expand or things like that. Next slide, please. And the fourth overarching finding, employers are very committed to dual enrollment. Early exposure to careers, it was communicated to us, is incredibly important, and dual enrollment is a great avenue for that. And we've mentioned a couple of times now in this meeting that dual enrollment is really a huge growth area for our colleges within TBR. exposure and acceleration towards a credential of value and a family sustaining income. The leaders at the convening were particularly interested in dual enrollment, then to integrate work-based learning, those experiences to ensure that students gain new skills. And so the students understand what a day in the life of this particular occupation looks like. And also I heard a couple of sidebar comments. Sometimes it's just as important for a young person to understand what they don't want to do for a living as it is to learn what they want to do for a living. All college presidents have those stories about new nursing students coming in, and when you hit the first day of clinical and they're having to draw blood, a student or two will generally just say, okay, that's it. But if they'd have figured that out while they were still in high school in a dual enrollment or a based learning experience, they'd have saved themselves a lot of time, money, and effort, and they would have saved a seat for someone who really wanted to be a nurse. Give you an example, dual enrollment, the commitment. I live in Madison County, and Madison County does really well economically, thanks to Regent Spurgeon and other folks like that. But even in Madison County, 40% of the students and graduating students in Madison County will not pursue a post-secondary education, even in Madison County. So it's incredibly important that we reach those students while they're still in high school via dual enrollment, where they can learn and earn those particular skills that are going to help them to succeed once they graduate high school. Next slide, please. So those four overarching findings kind of lead to what we call a call of action or call to action. Industry's ready to innovate, expand opportunities, apprenticeship, short-term workforce training, dual enrollment. There's a need for additional support to pilot and grow partnerships designed to upskill and reskill Tennesseans. And Dr. McCormick, I'm going to kick it to you either here on this next slide, if you want to input here on either here on this next slide.
Thank you, Dr. Sisk. This is going to lead into our next presentation, but I will go ahead and say that what we did find was there is a direct need for cross-agency work with us working with TBR, with labor, with ECD, and with our colleges and the local chambers to be able to accomplish this work. And we do need that data infrastructure, which is going to be an ask that we have in our strategic priorities that we will present, as I said, next. And we've got to invest in the marketing and the communications to be able to pull students and prospective students into these programs to meet the needs of business and industry.
Next slide, please. So, Vice Chair Reynolds, that concludes our presentation. Zachary and I, or even Dr. McCormick, we're standing by to answer any questions the regents may have.
Thank you. Any comments or questions today? I'm mindful of our time since we're running a little behind. Kyle Spurgeon, you're up.
There we go. I bet Regent Burdine and Regent Hooper will agree with this, working in the economic development space, that what you're proposing is greatly needed, particularly with our smaller and rural chambers and economic development groups. Mid-size and larger chambers have the ability to have a workforce person on staff or somebody that specializes in that. So what you're looking at, I think, will especially help those rural communities. So well done. Good idea.
That is great feedback. I know we're all looking forward to hearing and learning more on this full report. Anybody else? All right, well done. This has been a good discussion. Thank you. I want to pick up our pace just a little. We're coming back to Kim to lay on the legislative priorities as she just referenced. But Brian, why don't you come up first in this external affairs portion, and we have another proposed revision to take a quick look at.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll try to make up some time. Just piggybacking on what Jeff Sisk was talking about on the non-credit and workforce development programs, sometimes those don't get the same level of attention as our for-credit programs. So we're proposing a revision to the advertising policy just to make it clear that when you're marketing a non-credit program, it's subject to the same marketing policies as our other marketing activities, including review by the CMO. And sometimes we have partnerships where we work with somebody else and a third party to help prepare some of the content. And sometimes those entities are the ones that issue the credential. And we just want it to be clear that if that's going to be the case, or community college credential, but rather something from a third party. So,
could you give us an example of who a third party might be?
We're seeing an increasing number of, say, boot camps that might provide a IT or cybersecurity, some needed services that we don't have. And there might be just a workforce development credential in say use of Excel or Microsoft or things like that that are really too short. So it's fairly common in high ed to partner with EDUCAUSE or some of these other companies to offer this workforce training. It may cost several $100s. It's not big, but for whatever reason, and I'd have to defer to the academics as to why we don't get more into that space, but rather partner with these entities and provide that.
Thank you. Anybody else on this one for Brian? So this too will be on a consent agenda when we gather next. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Kim, let's come back to you kind of in building blocks here. Let's talk a little bit about where you are on these priorities.
Yes, thank you, Chair Reynolds. So now what we want to do is preview what will be presented at the External Affairs meeting and also at the Business and Finance meeting. But if you go ahead and switch the slide, please, Carol. Thank you. So you all know every year we have overall system priorities. These are overarching in nature. These are the things that we do, our government relation team does every year. We make sure that we pursue equitable funding for our campuses, equitable meaning for both community colleges and technical colleges. We want to expand the access and affordability for all Tennesseans. We want to enhance safety and security for our campuses. We want to make sure we have appropriate resources to be able to meet the needs of business and industry and our students who are either completing at the community colleges and transferring on to universities. We want to make sure that our system has the resources available to be flexible to meet the needs of, again, business and industry. And we want to make sure that we have system-wide, we have a recruitment and retention strategies in place for effective faculty and staff. So those, again, are our overarching priorities. They've been in place since Chancellor has been here. And that is really what our government relation team works on every year. But now I want to move to the strategic priorities and legislative priorities that are in place for this year. If we can change slides, please. All right. So every year we poll presidents, we talk to senior staff, we talk to business and industry, we talk to legislators, and we create our strategic initiatives. Chancellor pulls together her senior staff. We just recently did this last month. We spent a day going through all of the information we had from all of the stakeholders, and we came up with these strategic initiatives for 2025. So again, these will be formally presented in External Affairs Committee and in Business and Finance at the board meeting. But at this point, I would like to call on Dr. Lemming to describe the Customer Relationship Management System request.
Yeah, so I plan at the board to share an update on where we are with launching our CRM statewide. We are 1 year into funding that we received from the state to launch this. And in order for us to sustain that work beyond the implementation, we are looking to get funding for the reoccurring cost for that software that all of our TCATs and our community colleges. So that's what this funding request is for, is just for us to continue that good work that we've done over the course of the last year.
Thank you. And that request will be 1.4 million recurring. So next slide, please. Okay, so in the last presentation, you heard about all the wonderful workforce hours that we are doing in the system. You've seen the increase. Would it be nice to be able to expand that even more? Absolutely, yes. And that is our intent. You also heard from Jeff and Zachary about the workforce convening and what business and industry across the state tell us that they need from us. So based on those things, we would like to expand the current Center for Workforce Development into the Tennessee Accelerates Workforce Center. This is a statewide network led by TBR that includes all of our institutions, both community and technical colleges. We want to serve as a resource hub for our colleges. We want to be able to promote all of the programs that are offered. We want to be able to help them with equipment. We want to be able to help with personnel. We want to be able to meet the needs of business and industry in these target market sectors. Chancellor has had meetings with people from two of the largest industries in the state of Tennessee, frankly, the music industry and the Road Builders Association. They are all telling us exactly what we heard in the workforce convening of what they need. They need to be able to have short-term training that is stackable, that can lead to credentials, and they need to have highly skilled trained employees. So that's what this funding will do. We're going to be accountable. We're going to have metrics in place. We want to make sure that one of our goals is to increase the workforce training hours in companies served by 25% by 2028. We want a minimum of 80% of those trainees employed with sustainable wages within a year. And we want to be fiscally accountable, and we intend to do that. So this would be a $5.95 million recurring ask, 550 non-recurring. The 550 non-recurring would be able to build out that database so that we can track what we're doing, numbers of companies served, the number of students served, and the number of students employed. Again, this is to support our colleges, and we will be that network source available at the board office to help them implement what they need to be able to do. Dr. Tidings, you may want to jump in on this one because I know this is near and dear to your heart.
Well, absolutely. I mean, this is something that we've been working on for a long time. We've got pieces of this that we are deploying. The database that we have started to build out has been hugely helpful, not just for us, but for labor and ECD as they continue to recruit new companies into the state of Tennessee. I think you mentioned it earlier that you measure what you value and you value what you measure. And that's what we are trying to make sure that we do. We want to be very purposeful in what we're doing in this space so that we are growing the workforce. Several years ago, we were just more reactive. We waited for companies to come to us, and now we know that we've got to be the ones out reaching to companies, helping them to grow, helping them to find the individuals to go to work. So again, just part of the long-range plan that we've had for 8 years. And I feel like we've made great strides. I am extremely excited about the work that we're doing with the music industry in the state of Tennessee. We've got some plans there that I'll be letting you know more about as we firm up what we're doing with them. But we've had some great conversations in how we can support that industry more. The biggest industry in the state, and we've really not done a lot of training for them. And I'm not talking about the artists so much. I'm talking about all of the other jobs that go behind that. All of the people that are in this state that have to support that industry. And as one of the individuals I met with said, follow the dollar. If you figure out how people get paid, then you can figure out what the jobs are that they need to be successful in that industry. And that's what we're working on doing. The Road Builders Association, again, roads are being built in this state, and they are one of the largest industries in the state. And we've been working with them on what specifically they need to be able to continue to build roads in the state and make them the finest in the country. So thank y'all.
Thank you, Chancellor. And back to the road builders, one of the things that they need are heavy equipment operators. And heavy equipment operator training does not qualify for financial aid because it is too short in nature. So that kind of leads me to the next slide, Carol. The second part of this ask is for $9 million recurring dollars for short-term training. Back to what I just said about the heavy equipment operator, that's one example of a short-term training program that does not qualify for aid. So to be able to do what we want to do, to be more successful at what we want to do, it would be extremely helpful if we had that funding in place for this short-term training. So that is what this ask is for. Next slide, Carol. Okay, I would like to call on Ms. Alicia Fox to talk about the cybersecurity enhancement that we all know we need, unfortunately.
Thank you, Kim. So as you can see on your screen, we've got an $8.9 million recurring ask for cybersecurity enhancements. You may recall that we had a similar request last fiscal year in our strategic initiatives. So this has been updated a little bit for salary dollar inflation and then some additional hardware and software upgrades. So the $8.9 million recurring would allow us to hire a full-time CISO, which is the Chief Information Security Officer, an additional IT auditor, and then 2 security specialists at the system office, and then up to 12 additional security specialists to support all of the individual colleges. In addition to the personnel recurring request, this would give us funding for additional software purchases, including some cyber monitoring as well as intrusion testing software, and some hardware improvements such as firewall and server upgrades. So again, this is just, I think as we all know, cybersecurity has really grown over, the need for this has grown over the years, and state government and higher education continues to move up the list of high priority targets. And so we just want to be able to do what we can to help mitigate some of the risk here on the cybersecurity side.
Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, at this point, I'd like to call on Dr. Lemming again to talk about the Student Support Network.
So this proposal is to expand a pilot that we're doing right now with 3 community colleges in partnership with the Tennessee Department of Labor and Workforce Development, Human Services, and the Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse. Essentially, it's bringing our 3 agencies together to figure out places where we can collaborate, streamline processes for students to apply for different state aid programs in these various units, and then also provide training and support for our staff on the campus. So we've started that work. Again, hope to share more details about this with you in the coming months, but we've started and would like to expand it beyond the 3 pilot schools because we think it's going to make a significant difference, including the development of a dashboard so we can see across our agencies who's using what services and what they may be eligible for that they're not applying for currently.
Thank you, Dr. Lemming. And next slide, Carol. All right, this is a large number, and I realize that, but it's $430 million non-recurring. This is for the Community College Workforce Development Revitalization. As you know, Governor Lee and the General Assembly gave us $1 billion to finish out our master plan for the TCATs so that they can basically provide the technical training that we need them to do. Our community colleges are sitting, many of them are sitting on campuses built in the 1960s. I hate to say that something born in the 60s was old, but they're getting kind of old. And we really need at least 1 building on each of those TCAT campuses revitalized, retrofitted. I don't know what the word is we want to use here, but they need help, and they need that help so that they can provide that technical training as well for community college students. Community colleges do a lot of technical training. They have workforce development arms, and they have Associate of Applied Sciences in technical fields. So we would like to be able to renovate and repurpose at least 1 of those buildings on each of those 13 campuses. Executive Director Dick Tracy, is there something you would like to add here on this one?
Sure, Kim. She's right, and looking at that, and it's something we've been kind of looking at for quite some time on the community colleges in developing our master plans. even with before the major decline in enrollment, we saw, especially our rural community colleges enrollment stayed fairly flat. And so we were looking at, how we could increase offerings there, what they needed in the community. And so one of the things we've been discussing is, I think, a couple of things. One is doing, and I've talked with the presidents in the past and said, probably what the outcome of your master plan will be showing that you don't need any new buildings, but you probably need some substantial renovation work. So in this and looking at that, and since then, we want to consider being able to bring programs on some of the campuses that don't have that, say at Dyersburg State, possibly, where we could revitalize some space and actually build some additions where we may build some high bay type space that's going to be flexible so that they can work along either offering programs, or we can work with the TCATs to be able to stand up programs at those campuses fairly quickly.
Thank you, Dick. Regent George, see your hand up.
Yeah, just a quick question. I just wanted to confirm the $1 billion that was appropriated by the governor. Was that all for TCATs and nothing was for the community colleges? And then the 430 million is all for community college renovating existing buildings.
Yes, sir. Now, in the TCAT facilities where we were developing higher education centers, we have, our goal was to be able to offer programs. So TCAT Dixon, we're utilizing space for Nashville State. They'll be running allied health programs next to the campus. So they are TCAT facilities, but just like our other facilities, we're looking for the campuses to partner. So there are a lot of community colleges that are part within those facilities, but that $1 billion was targeted for the TCATs.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right, Carol, next slide. So I want to end with this. Those are the strategic priorities, those that will require funding. We also will have legislative priorities this year as well. We know that our presidents have all voiced their concerns about financial aid, and particularly with Promise, Reconnect. We know that our presidents would like to see the age for Reconnect drop to 21 years old. We also know that many of our presidents, I was just on the phone with one of them last night, really feel like Promise should be available in a part-time status for those students that need to do things like work and they can't come full-time, and also Reconnect. So those are things that we are aware of and we will be advocating for. But what we're doing really is waiting. I know that THEC and TSAC, if Regent Gentile is on here, they're looking at potential financial aid reforms. So we are watching for that. But we also are ready to do what we need to do in our work for advocating for those things as the legislative session starts. So that is an update on the legislative priorities. By the time we have the board meeting, we may have something more specific, but we don't know just yet what we will do. It will depend on what THEC and TSAC do. Are there any questions? Chair Reynolds, that completes our report.
Well, thank you. That $430 million number got my attention this morning.
Thought it would.
It did.
Yeah.
Oh,
you can't get if you don't ask.
That's right. That's true enough. No, not good work. And more time, obviously, on this in the weeks to come. Alicia, is there anything then you want to add on this legislative priorities discussion?
There is not. I was just going to let you know I don't have anything additional to add. I will present this, as Dr. McCormick noted, in the Finance Committee at the board meeting.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And with that, Dick Tracy, can you be equally brief on an informational update for our capital outlay for this coming year, or our request, I should say?
Sure, Regent Reynolds. Yes. Back in June, we brought our capital outlay projects that we were going to submit to THEC. THEC hadn't issued their guidelines at that point. So we were kind of going off of the previous year's guidelines, which allowed us to submit 3 capital outlay projects. We added a 4th project because of the need, but we were going to just resubmit those projects. The second project was the project, the Vol State TCAT Hartsville project, and we had increased the amount based off of the program needs. What THEX, when their instructions came out, basically, if the projects that scored last year, they decided this year they would carry those over. Previous instructions were you had to resubmit every year. We had one project on that list, and that was the Wilson County Vol State project. So we had to leave the amount basically the same, or we would have had to resubmit it and probably fallen off the list. So what we've done is we've just basically separated the Wilson County into a phase 1 and phase 2. So what we'll be sending, what we brought to the committee last year was for outlay was a total of $261,500,000. They allowed us to put in some escalation for that project. So by splitting it out, it goes up a little bit, but all we're doing is splitting that project into 2, and the total, what we're going to submit for that on the outlay side would be $283,500,000, and there's no change on the maintenance side.
Any questions or comments for Dick? And again, we'll look at this. The committee will see all of this in September.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you all. Good job. And we're going to close this session on finance with another policy revision from Brian.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This proposed policy revision is doing some cleanup work and making some substantive revisions to the policy regarding approvals of agreements and contracts. First of all, contract is a defined term to include MOUs, agreements, letters, intent. People have a way of trying to say, oh, this wasn't a contract, so I didn't need to submit it like a contract. And we're trying to make sure that's clear. In section 2A9, we really are just doing some cleanup work in striking language about contracts that historically have not been submitted to the chancellor in the system office and that do not need to be submitted to the chancellor in the system office. You've really academic type things for cooperative agreements that are getting sufficient review by the colleges. And then in section 2A10, what we're trying to do is clean up and make sure that when we share information with other entities for the studies, you've seen Dr. Deaton's excellent studies and Dr. Moreland's excellent studies and excellent work on how to improve education. The reason they're partly able to get some of the data and to share some of the data with other entities is because FERPA allows us to share information in limited circumstances when it's being used by others to improve educational outcomes. We just want to make sure that that these contracts have a little bit more control because we're sharing student information, and thus a second level of control is sending them through the system office so that the chancellor can review and make sure that any studies being proposed by the colleges are appropriate and not going to misuse student data. And then another cleanup is that to say that TCAT contracts must be approved by the contract unless there's exception, and there are a number of exceptions for things that don't really need to come through the system office. This has been reviewed and approved by the Business Affairs Subcouncil as well as the presidents who recommend approval. And with that, I'll ask for questions.
Comments or questions for Brian? If not, John Khaleesi, you are up next. Thank you, Brian. John Khaleesi, we don't have the opportunity to thank you often enough for all you do and appreciate you bringing these 2 governance policies for our review today.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, everybody. I'll be quick because I know we're short on time. The first policy we have up is for the personally identifiable information. The material revision there is pulling out the campus ID. The primary reason for that is it's in conflict with our use of that. A lot of times our email addresses or our accounts are part of that ID, so we're sort of in conflict. So we're going to pull that out. That's the real material change on this policy. And then General Counsel, they added some commented changes to improve the accuracy and just ensure that it's aligned with the standards and policies of PII. So that's the two primary changes of that policy. Any questions around that one?
Keep going.
I'll go to the next one. And so the digital identity authentication management access control policy, that really was to focus on the GLBA safeguards to ensure that we have some of those areas improved, like password length, and ensuring that the student accounts also have to meet those needs, whereas before we sort of excluded them because it was easier to handle that. So we wanted to ensure that not only, campus staff and faculty, but the students as well have their accounts where they need to be. Also, there's a requirement from the PCI compliance. It's coming in 2025. We wanted to make sure that we had that in there as well. And that is also around the character length. There's other things in there around multi-factor authentication, just all those areas we need to make sure that we shore up, and then we've got those, memorialized in a policy. So that's the primary changes to that one.
Brian, I think you put something in the chat. Was there any clarification you wanted to add to John's background?
With GLBA is the Graham-Leach-Bliley Act, which relates to regulation of financial institutions. We count as one under that definition because of the information we get, and thus we're subject to it. And it relates to protecting confidential and personal electronic information.
Thank you. Any questions or comments for John?
Only a comment to reiterate how thankful we are to have John. He is behind the scenes 99% of the time, but what he's doing is keeping us safe at a level that no one completely understands. So we can't say enough to thank him for all that he does.
Hear, hear. Well said. Thank you, John. And folks have questions. I assume you will be available if anybody reaches out, and we would appreciate that.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, sir. Much appreciated. Chancellor, a quick mention on, well, we've referenced it all morning, but our gathering in Dyersburg here in 3 short weeks.
Absolutely. We are truly looking forward to being in Dyersburg on September 19 and 20 for our 2-day quarterly board meeting. The meeting will begin at 1 o'clock on Thursday, the 19th, and at 9:30 on Friday, September 20th. A draft of the board meeting agenda was included in your materials for today's meeting. And Mariah is working closely with Dyersburg State to finalize all the activities surrounding the board meeting. She'll send the board additional details about the meeting soon. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to Mariah, myself, or Vice Chair Reynolds. And again, as all of you are aware, these meetings are just so incredible because it not only gives us time to conduct our business, but to talk about the business of TBR in a more casual setting, and to really, I think it is just very impactful. So encourage each and every one of you to go to Dyersburg and let us show you all the wonderful things that we have going on. Thank you.
Indeed. And Dr. Scott, Dr. Cook, Dr. Scott Cook and his team are great hosts. So it will be fun to be there. And I know for all of us who have been on this board, being on our campuses is the heart and soul of what we do. So that's very exciting. Mariah also asked me to remind everybody she needs your registration by next Friday, given the compressed time here in between this meeting and the next. So if you haven't registered, find that in your email or reach back out to Mariah if you have any questions. Does anyone have anything else for the good of the order this morning? If not, there is no further business to come before this board, and with apologies to Chairman Burdine for running late, we'll move into the Audit Committee meeting.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As Chairman of the Audit Committee, I'm calling the meeting to order. Madam Secretary, would you please call the roll?
Thank you. Since this is an electronic meeting, there are 2 questions that need to be answered by Regents for the record. First, can the regent simultaneously hear and speak with others participating in the meeting? And second, is the regent alone in the room? If the answer to both questions is yes, the regent can simply answer yes to both questions. Anyone who is not alone should identify any other people present in the room with the regent. When I call your name, please answer these two questions. I'll start with our audit committee members, and then we'll check to see if any other regents may be hanging on the line. Chairman Burdine.
Yes to both.
Regent Kastner.
Yes to both.
And Regent White.
Here and yes to both.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, you do have a quorum for your committee, and I'll now check for our other regents who may have joined or remained. Governor Lee, Regent Gentile, Regent George,
Here, yes to both.
Regent Harrell,
Present, yes to both.
Commissioner Hatcher, Regent Hooper,
Here and yes to both.
Regent Powers,
Here and yes to both.
Regent Emily Reynolds,
Here and yes to both.
Commissioner Reynolds,
Here and yes to both.
Regent Richardson,
Here and yes to both questions.
Regent Roberts, Regent Spurgeon, Regent Stevenson, and Regent Barlin.
I'm here and yes to both.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, we are clear to proceed. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. This meeting is being held electronically as it is the most economically efficient way, and the matters to be considered require timely action and review by the audit committee. Given that the necessity to meet electronically is a non-controversial and routine item, I propose that the necessity be adopted by unanimous consent. Anyone who wants to have individual votes on the necessity to meet electronically should feel free to object, in which case we will have a roll call vote. If there's no objection, the necessity to meet electronically is adopted. Do I have any objections? Hearing none, let's go to our Chief Audit Executive, Mr. Mike Batson.
Thank you, Regent Burdine. Welcome, Regent Harrell and Regent Richardson. Glad to have you aboard, and welcome to all the other audit committee and board members. Thank you very much. We'll get started first with informational reporting. Quite a long report. I'll try to keep it succinct and so that you hear what you need to hear. We'll start with recommendations and findings. Again, making good progress here. A couple of items I'd like to note. A couple of older recommendations for both Chattanooga and Southwest internal audit recommendations have been cleared, as well as a couple of pretty old recommendations for Southwest related to state audit. Those have now been cleared. So glad to get those checked off. For Roan State, a couple of older recommendations related to accounts receivable on page 4. Want to give an update on that. Since the materials were prepared, Roan State has started doing a 28-day e-billing process for their accounts receivable that they hope will help clear up some of the timeliness that has resulted in previous findings. They're currently undergoing a state audit right now. Not sure that the timeliness is going to help them avert another finding, but at least they're on the right path now and have what appears to be a solution in place. But we still, my guess is, may see another either recommendation or finding there in that area. But hopefully they can put that behind them. There are several other recommendations that have been cleared, including information security recommendations. Next, I'd like to move on to covering our audit reports. First, miscellaneous external reviews. Quite a few of those. We had, I think, 6 different ones, 4 TSAC program reviews at Chattanooga State, TCAT Chattanooga, Roan State, and TCAT Knoxville. Again, with several minor recommendations and findings that were easily correctable. Another one that we had was at Vol State, Tennessee Department of Health that I want to point out. That was for their ELC grant, and unless you want to know what ELC is, I will avoid that at this point. They had one issue noted. They had 3 invoices that were timely in August, September, and October of 23, and they were able to immediately correct those issues. That is all I wanted to cover for the miscellaneous external reviews. Next, we'll go on to federal audits. And starting off, 10 of our colleges had Veterans Affairs compliance surveys. Chattanooga, Cleveland, Motlow, Northeast, and the TCATS Hartsville, Knoxville, Livingston, Pulaski, and Shelbyville, all with minor discrepancies, some with minor discrepancies that, again, they have either corrected or in progress of correcting. Columbia State had a Department of Defense review with several recommendations that they are currently working on. Nothing that's long-term there. And then one I want to highlight is Northeast State had a Department of Labor enhanced desk monitoring review of a strengthening community colleges grant. 2 findings there. One was low performance. The audit found that the progress on the grant was not to the percentage it should have been for the time they'd had the grant. The response was it was primarily due to a misunderstanding of reporting participating students, and they were not reporting all the students that were participating that they could have reported. Once they've made adjustments for that, they're back on track in terms of their progress for that grant. Similar to that, low expenditures. For the time they'd had the grant, they were lagging behind in program expenditures. That was a result of one very large purchase of $240,000 that was planned for the fourth quarter of 23, but through various delays, including delays in getting a budget revision request approved, that was pushed into first quarter of 24. Once they've caught up with those expenditures, I think now they're within 1% of where they should be going forward on their expenditure rate, and they have plans to use the remaining funds expediently, so they should be fine there. Next up, internal audit reports. Quite a few internal audit reports this time, but want to highlight just a few. Chattanooga State, the HERF audit, no findings. They had a few out of the report recommendations, but nothing significant there. Vol State, a payroll activities audit. This audit was interesting. It covered controls, processing, calculations, reconciliations, everything related to payroll. They found one issue, which was an employee who was a 50% regular part-time employee had received leave calculated at 100%. Vol State immediately made that correction, got the leave back where it should be. The person did not go into a negative leave status as a result of that, but that was a good catch there on that audit, and they have put a process in place to keep that from happening in the future. Next, both TCAT Livingston and TCAT Shelbyville, we had internal control audits there where we had noted some ways they can improve their student billing process going forward. See next, Chattanooga State faculty credential audit. We had several recommendations there, basically related to making sure that the credential requirements are put into their database correctly, as well as having all credentials applicable for faculty and instructors uploaded into the database timely so that they're there when they're needed. Next up, Northeast State, another interesting one. This is an investigation of customer loyalty program. Northeast State has a program with one of the local grocers to find or to provide food and needs for certain students. And the grocery chain enrolled the college into their customer loyalty program where you get gas points. And they don't use the gas points. It's just part of the program when they provide gift cards. to the students, the points add up, and they found that someone was using those gas points personally inappropriately. That was caught fairly quickly. The person was reprimanded. They put corrective actions in place. Northeast is looking at, I think, the possibility of using those points in the future for their college vehicles, but they've suspended that now, so they're not even getting those, and that's not active, just to make sure that doesn't happen again. But interesting situation there, and wanted to point that one out to you. That really covers the highlights that I wanted to bring up in terms of our audit reports. Going forward, those are in section 1B, but if there are any questions, I'll pause. If there are any of those that I did not cover in detail that you'd like to hear about, be glad to do that. Okay, moving forward. System-wide internal audit updates. First, just a mention of our open positions currently. We still have a few open. Cleveland, Jackson, and Montlow, those positions are still open. We're still working with the college presidents to make sure we have coverage there. However, on a more positive point, we have 3 new internal audit directors at our campuses. First, at Dyersburg, we want to welcome back Crystal Pittman. She was previously the internal audit director at Jackson State. She had left for a little over a year. And is now back at Dyersburg. So glad to have her back. At Southwest, Dr. Hall has hired Linda Soder as the new director of internal audit. Linda was previously with compliance area at FedEx, as well as internal audit at the University of Memphis. So glad to have Linda there at Southwest with her experience. And last but not least, at Columbia State, Dr. Smith has hired Leah Adelaide. I think I've pronounced that correctly. I do it different every time, Leah, so if you're there, I apologize. But I'm glad to have Leah. She just started. She has internal audit experience with the state of Indiana, Tennessee Bureau of TennCare, and was also previously with the Tennessee Department of Commerce and Insurance. So really good experience, and glad to have Leah there also. On another note, while we're on personnel, want to point out here something that has kind of been off the radar, but based on the restructuring with policy and strategy and organizational effectiveness, beginning in September, Sean Chisholm, who is the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Organizational Effectiveness, will come under the umbrella of internal audit. Sean, as many of you know, he will continue to do his compliance functions and duties. It will just be a separate, away from internal audit, but within our office. It seemed to be a natural fit. And looking at the reorganization there, based on the confidentiality of his work and the compliance nature, we've looked at several other models at other higher ed institutions, and that seems to work. So we're glad to have Sean sort of back in-house. So you may remember back pre-COVID, he was stationed in our office just physically for a short time, and then everybody was sent home. But glad to welcome Sean back into our area now, functionally as well as physically. Next up, just a quick mention, management's risk assessment, that time of the year for those and for us to cover those, and those will be presented in the non-public executive session.
Is that it, Mike? Oh, no.
That's it. More informational items, Regent Burdine. Year-end status report, fiscal year 24. This is progress on our internal audit plans. Really, we stayed on track this year, I think, better than in the past, and glad to see that. We've talked before about risk-based audits versus required audits, and we want to be more covering risk-based audits as well as requested audits by the president in consultation. We want that to kind of be in the 40% area, 35-40% area. And this year we moved up, we're like at 38% this time around for those areas. So that's that's good for us. We don't want to put too much out there that's required. We really want the presidents and the auditors to be able to cover areas that they see a need and they see a risk, and we're getting more into that direction. And we do try to keep our required audits to have a risk basis, and we'll talk about that more in a minute, but we don't really want to require anything just out of interest or anything like that. We want to really have a risk and a need to cover that area before we'll require it. One other area, okay, here's the planned hours versus actual hours. Again, pretty normal, except where you see vacancies there, or we've had people leave, a little bit skewed, but again, on track with those hours. Investigations continues to be a busy area. I think we started the year with 18 open investigations. We added 12 investigations from complaints, new investigations, and we closed the year at June 30th with 14. So keeping our head above water on the investigations. And again, appreciate Jennifer and Daniel and all the work they're doing, multitasking in a great way, and keeping those moving, as well as the community college auditors and the work they do on those investigations and the assistance they provide. Thank you. With Chair Burdine, that concludes my report. This was an informational item and required no action.
All right, anybody have any questions, Mike, before we move on? Next section does require a vote. Okay, hearing none, Mike.
Thank you, Regent Burdine. Next up is a review of fiscal year 25 internal audit plans. They start on page 74. I touched a little bit ago on required versus risk-based. This time the plan goes a little more towards required. However, we do have a risk basis there. The required audits we plan for fiscal year 25, of course, we always have to do president's expense and chancellor's expense, and those are ongoing right now. Those are required by statute. We also have to do follow-up of state audit findings, which is also required by statute. This year, we'll also be doing an athletics audit that we've discussed before. It'll be primarily compliance related to areas we have seen concern before. Conflict of interest, housing, and travel. And again, based on our prior experience, as you know, the last couple of years, we've seen that risk sort of step up each year. And so we want to do an across-the-board audit instead of just putting out those fires where we've had problems. Let's see where everybody is in relation to those compliance areas. And so that's why we required that one this year. Again, very strong risk basis on that. We'll also be doing a funding formula audit this year, a little bit later this year. So we plan on that. Again, moving our required up, but we think we have a good basis in risk to go there. Regent Burnett, that concludes my report on planned audits for fiscal year 2025.
Thank you, Mike. This section does require a roll call vote. Can I get a motion, please?
So moved. It's Tom.
Thank you, Tom. Second.
Second.
Thank you, Todd. Any discussion? Madam Secretary, please call the roll for the vote.
Chairman Burdine,
Aye.
Regent Kastner,
Aye.
and Regent White.
Aye.
Motion carried.
Thank you. Back to Mike, please.
Thank you, Regent Burdine. Next up, internal audit charters. As you know, each college campus has their own charter for internal audit, which is signed by the auditor and the president. And so today we're presenting two that we have. Dyersburg because of the new auditor there, and in Ball State because of the new president. Coming up at the next meeting, we have Southwest and Columbia's that weren't in time for the materials, so we'll be reviewing those at the next meeting. But I present the Dyersburg and Ball State revised charters in your materials for your approval.
Thank you, sir. Do I have a motion?
Move to
So
approve.
moved.
I'll
get second then. It's Tom.
Okay, motion by Todd, second by Tom. Any discussion? Madam Secretary?
Chairman Burdine,
Aye.
Regent Kastner,
Aye.
Regent White.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Back to you, Mike.
Thank you, Regent Burdine. This is again the time of year we're required by by state law to follow the Institute of Internal Auditors standards. And part of the standards are that we present to you an overview of the standards that we're required to follow, as well as our charter, the audit committee charter and the internal audit charter. Before we get into the details of that, I do want to note that the IIA, Institute of Internal Auditors, the international standards for the professional practice of internal auditing, I always have to read my notes for that, the definition of internal auditing and the code of ethics, the IIA has made major sweeping revisions of those, and those will go into effect in 2025. They will now be known as the Global Internal Audit Standards, which is a lot easier to say, but it's going to take a lot of work to get compliant and get where we need to be. We're currently working on adapting our manual, our policies, our charters to meet those standards, and we'll be presenting a draft probably at the next meeting for your approval. Just to give a preview of that. Many of the changes to the standards, again, a little bit of a preview, are really just putting into code what we see as inherent in our role, in our process, and a lot that's in the new standards are already addressed in the audit committee charter as well as the internal audit charters. For example, the code of ethics is going to be replaced with a new standard, 1.1, honesty and professional courage, and it just notes that the principle of integrity needs to be emphasized, and that professional courage is a required component of integrity. It also requires the CAE, in my role, to set environments supporting integrity. I would like to believe that we're there, but we need to put that in writing in our documents. So there's a lot of that really transitions what we do, or that we may already have in writing that we're going to need to tweak, rearrange, and really come at from a different angle. So you'll be seeing that going forward in the next few months. So on that, for the current standards, I know we're short on time, and I'll try to cover some highlights here. First, the charter. And the charter sets out the responsibilities for the audit committee. Just want to highlight some of those. Oversight and accountability for all aspects of TBR, including engagements with the comptroller's office. It does spell out, which is a key thing, that my role reports directly to the audit committee and the board. It authorizes audits or investigations of any area within the scope of responsibility. Reviewing staffing for the system office as well as the campus internal audit offices, and providing a mechanism for reporting fraud, waste, and abuse. So wanted to cover those key ones. Again, the list is there. There's also a chart in your materials, I believe on page 113, that really summarizes the role and responsibilities there. Please take time to review that when you can. Next up, just want to mention on the charters. Well, I'm sorry, Kate. We'll go back to the charter. Both the audit committee charter and the internal audit charter, we don't have any proposed changes at this time. The audit committee charter was revised at this time last year and was approved by the comptroller's office. We did have several revisions last time, but this time, especially with the sweeping changes coming forward, we're not recommending any changes to either charter, the internal audit charter or the audit committee charter. And I touched on responsibilities, and then standards are on page 114 of the materials. As I mentioned, we're required to comply with the IIA standards, including our quality assurance review every 5 years. We just completed that one last fall. So we're on a 5-year cycle to get back to that. The standards are summarized in your materials. In the interest of time, I won't go through them. It's quite extensive, but if there are any questions and concerns, I would be glad to answer those.
Any questions for Mike? And Mike, I agree. I believe you are there. You said use the word integrity, but we do need to put it in writing. So now this is
thank you, sir.
A little different motion. Do we have a motion to approve no revisions to the audit committee charter and the internal audit charter templates at this time?
So moved.
Thank you, Tom.
I'll second.
That was okay. Todd first, Tom second. Okay. Any discussion? Madam Secretary?
Chairman Burdine.
Aye.
Regent Kastner.
Aye.
Regent White.
Aye.
Motion carried.
Thank you, ma'am. This concludes the agenda for the public session. Does anyone have any other business to come before the committee? Hearing none, we stand adjourned. And thank you for everyone for your time. And the public session has concluded. Board members, board officers, and key audit personnel should have received information to join the executive session. So we'll see you in just a minute.